Said that I was a grumpy old man, but what can you do?
Well, I can't disagree there.
30 Moorland Fields, Fulford Road, York, 16th of November, 1961. That was my first residence.
No.
I was born at Fulford Hospital, in maternity hospital in York,
Oh,
on the 29th of October.
mm,
And my long form birth certificate
mm,
uh, tells me that my first address was 30 Moorland Fields, Fulford Road, York.
okay.
Now, 30 Moorland Fields, I went around about 10 years ago. I went back to York to see if the house was still standing. And
Mm,
lo and behold, yes, it was.
mm,
The house was part of the married quarters of the army. I was an army kid. I've said
yeah,
this. I've said this in several
yeah.
other podcasts. And if you go to York Barracks,
Mm,
uh, you've got the thing that goes up and down
yeah.
with to let people in. But if you look on your left-hand side, is a road that looks like a housing estate, and
Mm,
that there is Moorland Fields, and the house that I used to live in was a little bit up to the first curve and on the left, on the left.
yeah.
For
Yeah.
those who wish to find out where 30 Moorland Fields is, and
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's still standing today. Like I said, it
Yeah.
was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I only know that because um, it was on a document, and
Mm,
I didn't remember it
mm,
because it's not in my scope of remembering when
mm,
I was only like a week old.
yeah.
You know, I remember uh, when my family, because of the army, we
Yeah.
moved to Germany. Very sketchy things about Germany.
Yeah.
We went on to Singapore, and I remember
Mm,
a lot more about Singapore, even though I was only about 6 years old at the time.
yeah.
And we came back to the UK uh, in 1968.
Mm,
Now, I've often thought to myself, how much exactly can I remember from my very earliest age,
mm,
you know? And one of the tasks that I put to myself was the first song
mm,
that I remember listening to, but paying attention to, that I might
yeah.
have sang along to
Mm,
when at my very earliest age.
mm,
I could argue that Pinky and Perky, How Much Is That Doggy in the
yeah.
Window?
Yeah.
The Laughing Policeman. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that one.
Yeah.
Right. But I didn't I didn't hear them really paying
Yeah.
attention to them
Mm,
until around about 1969, 1970.
yeah.
Now in 1968, uh, my parents were still in the army,
Mm,
and we were sent to a place called Lypiat Camp in
yeah.
Corsham in Wiltshire.
Mm,
That's where my mum met the mother of Patrick McNee, just to
yeah, okay. Yeah.
finish a story. I counted another. And the first song that I really paid attention to
Mm,
uh, was in this year. I know it was this year because everybody was still going on about. I even know what part of the year it was
mm,
because everybody was still going on about "I'm Back in Britain," which was a campaign in 1968 that ran from
yeah.
January to around about March in the
Okay.
UK. I'm
Mm,
Back in Britain, 1968.
mm,
And the first song that I paid particular attention to, just to sing along to, that
mm,
if I listen to now, I can remember the good old days,
yeah.
was a song um, released by a band called Manfred Mann.
I am. Mm,
In 1968, I had to do some research on this one. It was called
mm,
Mighty Quinn.
Yeah.
You know, when Quinn the Eskimo gets here.
Yeah.
And it was number one in February of
Mm.
1968. So I imagine that at that time,
Mm.
as it was number one in the UK charts, that it was being played quite a lot on the radio, on the wireless, you know, as we
Yeah.
used to call it.
Yes. Wireless.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that was my first song that I really sang along to.
Yeah.
And it really is a catchy song.
Mm.
Now, I have heard a song by Manfred Mann
Mm.
called Pretty Flamingo.
Yeah.
Pretty Flamingo.
Yeah.
That was released in 66. Only in 66 we were still in Singapore. And although I sort of remember, but I can't say with confidence that
Yeah.
that was the song that I remember. A little bit like the Pinky and Perky and the
Yeah.
Laughing Policeman, you know.
Yeah.
It might be that my parents were Manfred Mann fans, you know,
Yes.
and they were playing it, and I just didn't twig on because of my age at the time. I was playing with my Action Men and playing
Yes.
with, you know, going outside to play and things like that.
Yeah.
So at the same time, another song that I listened to quite a bit and sang along to
Mm.
was a song with a guy called Cliff Richards. And
Yeah.
he sang a song in the country.
Yeah.
Now this was released, I think, in a film
Okay.
called this with the same title in the country in 1967. However, in the UK, the record was still floating around. I think that in the country, the film and his record was released late 67. So in 68, it might have been still floating around, just going down in the charts, you know,
Yeah.
years later. And so they for my memory,
Mm.
solid memory that I
Yes.
know that I used to sing along to
Mm.
those songs. And I defy anybody watching this to sit down
Yeah.
and don't go by what other people say
No.
to you.
Yeah.
You know, the people have said to me, but don't you remember listening to that, and I
Mm.
don't. But it'd be
No.
quite easier for me to say, yes, of course I do, and then
Yeah.
use that as a memory. That's a false memory. That's
Yeah.
a memory that somebody,
Suggestion. Yeah.
excuse me, that somebody implanted in your mind. It needs
Yeah.
to be a memory that yourself, you know for sure that you might remember the sound,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you might remember the incident, and you might have to investigate,
Mm.
do some research to find out when it was.
Yeah.
But it's that thing. It's that thing that you remember. That's the earliest. I remember other things from when I was younger.
Yeah.
But that was the first song. So in this category of listening to you, remembering your first song,
Yeah.
it's that. Other things I remember. I remember going to the beach when I was like
Yeah.
6 years old, 5 years old, when we were in Singapore. I remember all that. Nissan
Yeah.
Junior School. Remember all that. But in terms of music, well done, Manfred Mann, Mighty Quinn.
Mm.
That was my, excuse the voice. I've got that the dreaded lurgy.
Yes.
This week. You get to my age, you get the lurgy. It could develop into something grave.
Ooh, yeah,
Let's
yeah.
see what happens here.
I might be able to do a podcast by myself. That's the trouble. That's what I worry about.
Right. So there you go. That's the
yeah.
That's a challenge. First
Right.
first song that you heard, paid attention to, you definitely remember.
I mean, I can remember when we used to live in Chelmsford, because I originally came from Chelmsford, lived in Chelmsford. But ironically enough, and to lead into this, Chelmsford is where Marconi developed the radio waves and the whole thing of transmitting and things. But yeah. But Radio 2 was always being played on the radio in my house, Radio 2. Right. So it's easy listening. I'm just trying to remember. I remember being in the house in Chelmsford, listening to Radio 2, and I think it was a country song. and I can't remember what one it was, who it was. It was a woman, a female, and I can't remember. I'd have to do some research and try and remember. That's not a fake memory. So the fact I remember it, I can't remember the song. I just remember being there. I mean, there was a record player. My dad always liked his hi-fi systems. And I remember my mother always playing Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture for me.
Right.
Yeah, and because of the guns in it, I think I must have quite liked the guns or something.
That's when the rot sat in. That's when the rot set.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about that one.
Yeah, I remember the hi-fi, yeah, because there used to be Wolfdale speakers. I used to go and turn the labels of the Wolfdale upside down. Just remembered that.
How old were you?
Well, we moved from Chelmsford to where I ended up in Southend when I was 4 years old, late 4 years old. So yeah, so that is quite a memory to remember. I remember what's the house, and yeah, I remember where it was. I remember going for walks with my mother down by the river down there. Right. And yeah, different other things. I remember my my old play school, which was a rugby club. Yeah, they did the sort of nursery school, play school in a rugby club. Yeah, my mother always said in there, always went in there and smelt a beer, you know. Good introduction. Yeah, I remember Babycham adverts. We're going to get done for advertising here, but yeah, it's just memories.
I don't think they make it anymore.
No, I don't know. But yeah, I remember the Babycham and various other things, probably Guinness as well. Oh, yeah, other adverts all around.
Babycham was very 70s. Very 70s.
Well, I mean, yes, this would have been pre-75. So, yeah, so I do remember the advertising works. There you go, guys. You know, good thing. Yeah, now just trying to remember music. I mean, obviously, when I was younger, ABBA were about in the 70s, obviously. Manfred, yeah, I probably remember Manfred Mann from the 70s. That would have been one thing. And obviously the Beatles. Because, yeah, I mean, my father was a musician. He played, yeah. I didn't actually remember the organ there. He had an organ and he used to play in a band. But yeah, that's very early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, I grew up, if you like, round music. But like I said, Radio 2 was always on. So there could be a lot of memories for songs at the time and easy listening. So we would have been talking of songs from the 1950s, 60s and 70s with Radio 2. It's like you say, I remember The Laughing Policeman probably when I was younger. I remember, yeah, obviously nursery rhymes and things. What we had the Wally White and
no, it has to be adult music.
Yeah,
it needs to be something adult music, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I remember certain things. I think probably ABBA, but I won't say they were my first memory. Again, I seem to remember it as a country song, and I can't remember what one it was because in the 70s, country music was coming from the US, and you got some accent. Yeah, I think my mum used to have Radio 2 on more or less constantly when she was doing anything and around and everything else. It's like I say, yeah, I'm trying not to have false memories of things that were probably a bit later. And I could say a song from then that was probably very early 80s almost. Given that, yeah, I was at school. I mean, I remember going to school, starting my... I remember my mother going into the school I was meant to go in at Chelmsford, because just as I was turning 4 or 5 to start primary school, we were leaving Chelmsford and moving to Southend. And I remember my mother going into the school to tell them I was no longer going to be going there. And then I remember actually going in for a health check at the school I eventually ended up going and starting in primary school. So yeah, it's getting away from music, but it's memories, and I'm just trying to use it to try and jog things.
That's right. We use these experiences in life.
Yeah,
it's like a reference point in time.
Yeah,
You know,
Um,
if I remember a certain experience or
mm,
witness something,
mm,
um, even as adults we do it. You know,
yeah,
if we travel somewhere, for example, and we listen to a music that reminds us of home,
mm, yeah,
it's like a moment in time that we listen to music, and I think that's basically that's what's coming down to this thing about the
yeah,
memory.
yeah,
What is the earliest memory that you have of the of music? You know,
yeah,
and it's where you can guarantee that yes, that is what I was listening to.
yeah,
There you
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. To say it's about. I mean, um, yeah. I'm racking my brains here, and I can't remember. I mean, I love music, as you know, and yeah, sometimes we
go.
interchange, and I post music on that you could go, oh, ow. But yeah, it's like I said, I grew up in I wouldn't say a musical household, but my father was liked
Yeah,
music, and he was more
excellent.
jazz than anything else, really. My
Mhm.
father adores jazz. Um, yeah, that's what we always joke about Brazil, where we now live, that my father still thinks bossa nova. Bossa nova's played everywhere in Brazil. You and
Yeah,
I
right.
never hear it.
Yeah,
Um,
I try not to. I try not to whenever I can.
oh, I like some of the Brazilian music, bossa nova. I mean, yeah, and things. Yeah, I mean, again, it was probably around when I was younger as well. My father used to play it. Girl from Ipanema and Mascanada a lot on his keyboard. He doesn't know the words or anything.
No,
Um,
also.
but yeah, yeah, I suppose I remember them from when I was quite young. But yeah, again, this is very this is in the 70s. Um, yeah, I mean, even going back there, I mean, I lived in the area for years before I moved away. So it's not even like your experiences. You moved about a bit. We didn't really move
Right.
about a bit at all. I mean, more or less, moved from Chelmsford. I've been back and visited the place where I lived.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
Still
interesting.
stands.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about York in later life. I actually lived in York for a time and worked there.
Mm.
Down Holgate Road, I worked. And I lived various different places, wherever I could find somewhere to live. Um, yeah, it's um, York's a beautiful place. If you're ever going to visit anywhere, York is absolutely in the UK. York, I would put on your list.
Right.
Historical, if you like Vikings, it's the place to go and visit. So if you've been watching the series of Vikings on Netflix, go to York. They're very Viking centric there. Um, yeah, around the shambles is just incredible. You're almost walking back in a time machine. Very touristy though, unfortunately.
Mm.
You go. I would suggest anyone going to York, don't go peak season, March time. Yeah, or at Christmas, but go March time because it's you'll get a proper feel of it about everyone being about and quite
Yeah.
atmospheric as well.
Mm.
Um, yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, other memories I have. I mean, yeah. I actually bought when I was in the 1980s. I actually bought a
Yeah.
couple of yeah.
What year were you born in?
I was born in 1970.
So, right. So you're 10 years old, yeah, and you bought a 10 years old at the least, and you bought your first record, I should think. You're gonna
Probably bought my first record about 14 actually. I actually started getting some
say,
money, probably
yeah,
15.
no, well,
Yeah. One was I remember buying, yeah, when I actually had pocket money. I bought Queen's Greatest Hits. So I always like Queen. Again, that might be one of the first ones I had. That could be a memory that's in there that I didn't realise because I I remember Bohemian Rhapsody. But again, that was 1974, I think,
mm,
wasn't it? Yeah. Remember Bohemian Rhapsody, and then so I bought Queen. The other albums or records I started by were the Now. I've still got the first Now. That's what I call music album.
yes, yes. KTEL
Yeah.
Music Explosion.
Was it? Oh, yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
was in my days. In my
yeah,
days, it was
yeah,
KTEL Music Explosion.
yeah. Well, now it's obviously there. I got Now, and the other one I bought two albums: Rock Anthems One and Rock Anthems Two, the Red and the Blue
Mm,
albums.
mm,
So again, there was lots of music from the 70s, which I remember hearing now, thinking about it on the radio. Um, yeah, because I somehow always liked rock, even subliminally when I was younger. Obviously, then when you're getting a bit older, and I know we're changing it a bit here, and then into the 80s, the music and Duran, Adam and the Ants, I remember, in the late 70s.
Of course.
And I also remember some punk, but Adam and the Ants was obviously a cross between punk and if you like more pop music. Then you've got the Romantics, Ultravox, and things like that a little bit later. Yeah,
Of course.
But it's a
You want to know something interesting? The first time I heard the Beatles was when I was around about 12 or 13 years old. The early Beatles.
Yeah.
The 1964 to 1967.
Yeah.
They made two albums, 64 to 67, and then I think 68 to 70 or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's two albums of them.
Yeah.
One with the early stuff and one with the late stuff. And I hadn't heard of the Beatles until I was round about. I heard of the Beatles, but I haven't heard the Beatles until I was around about 11 or 12 years old in my mate's house at school. My mate's house, where he was a fan of the Beatles, and he played this LP of the early Beatles, and he's singing along, and I'm just watching. I'm just watching because I've never heard it before.
Yeah,
and it just goes to show that when in the like the 64 to 66 era, there were what we would class as the Mersey beat. There were an awful lot of bands around at the same time.
Yeah.
So you got Jerry and the Pacemakers, Herman's Hermits.
Yeah.
Was around. Like I said, Manfred Mann.
Yeah.
And if you listen to these songs, they all have that very British but very Mersey beat sort of sound to them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are many Mersey beat bands from Liverpool that haven't sort of come through to realise their potential, if you like. Around about 5 years ago, I was in a place called Bahia in Ceará, the state of Ceará, here in Brazil. And it's amazing the people that you meet as you're traveling around. This guy, he was crazy about English Mersey beat sort of music from that era. And he invited, as he found out I was English, they're talking to me, and he invited me down to his house. And I remembered so many songs. But only as I've grown up, I've learned these songs, and it just shows you how many bands that were around at that time. The Beatles must be really, really lucky because they lasted so long.
I mean, it was the British explosion, and like you say, from Mersey. I mean,
I missed it. I missed it as a baby. Well, I was born in 61, and until 67, I was whisked off to other places.
Well, but we often joke about my age group in the 80s. Too young to enjoy it, and too old to appreciate it, sort of thing. Or was it that way? But it's again, but I mean, in the 80s, there's still the Beatles, and I mean, it is a case even today. If you go to a party, it doesn't really liven up until they put the 60s music on, the Beatles, and
that's because the mums and dads and granddads get up and start to embarrass the rest of the family.
No, actually, the youngsters all know it as well. And I teach a lot, as you say, we talk about Brazilians. I teach a lot of younger Brazilians. They know exactly who the Beatles are. Yeah, just talking of the Beatles, I remember listening to Paul McCartney, and not associating with the Beatles, liking Paul McCartney, and never knew that he was in the Beatles until this was a young mind, then finding out he was in the Beatles, and
he wasn't even the lead singer.
No, but he was. Let's be honest, he was. Lennon, I thought, was brilliant, was creative, but probably McCartney was the main driving force behind it all, really. And when you read the history since, and McCartney has probably built his own history. Yeah.
It's the writing. It was the writing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
they had a good partnership writing, and
yeah.
that's what drove it on.
But it's a little bit like saying about Queen. There are four very good musicians who just somehow fate put them together and creative.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, people have always criticised Ringo for his drumming. Was it simple? It was, but it was Beatles drumming. He would listen to the song and actually drum to what was around him, as opposed to have fixed rhythm. I mean, yeah, he was. I often, yeah, everyone used to, yeah. Apparently, Lennon never said he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. Was wrong. I've done some research. That was totally unfair. Ringo Starr inspired a lot of younger, obviously a lot of younger drummers, because he was in the background. He was drumming to what was around him, as opposed to, you know, driving it almost. Because he could do that, because he had such good musicians around him who knew what they were doing as well. I mean, George Harrison was another incredible musician all round, probably the best musician there was in the Beatles. But yeah, a bit of a quieter one. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I mean, yeah, they're just releasing Let It Be again, and yeah, they've remastered. I remember watching that some years ago, and you could see where the riffs were all coming. It's a sort of pseudo documentary, but you could see there was the problem. Just going into, I don't want to be a history of the Beatles. Did Yoko Ono break up the Beatles? She was an influence, but I think you could say they were not weak men. Yeah, they very much knew what they were about. And yeah, I think John said, that's it, I'm leaving, probably under the influence of Yoko. But again, you can't say that John Lennon was a weak personality. He was too strong a person. He knew their time had come.
No.
He could see it. Yeah.
Right, it's good reminiscing. So let's leave this challenge open to anybody who sees this little video. Challenge is the first music that you conscientiously listened to in your life. How old were you, and where was it, and what was it? There you go. And if you can remember all that, leave a little comment underneath on the video.
Yeah.
And well,
we'll have a look
and now
at
if you're only 10 years old, that's cheating, right? So it's got to be somebody who's at least 30 years old.